If you want to get RL items or credits, save some time, save some money, go to AOR and get some items with my code Mackie. Hello. So right now I'm going to show you the best freestyle bindings. This is a very simple video. First, I'm just going to show you the best bindings, the ones that most freestylers use. Maybe you can tweak some things here and there from these bindings, but I'm just going to show you the better ones. And then if you don't want to change, or if you're unwilling to change at the moment, I'm just going to go through a small checklist to see if whatever bindings you have at the moment work for you mechanically in the long term. So let's start. So the first controller bindings that we're going to take a look at are mine. So I use joystick stalling binds, and what that means is I have my arrow on the stick, and when I started trying to stall, what I thought was, okay, if I move my stick to the right and I press on it with arrow left, so that means doing a right input and a left input at the same time, then it gets cancelled out and it does a stall, then I could just do a stall. So once I do that, then all I have to do is just do this very quickly and stall. But my main arrow is my arrow right, which is in my right bumper. And my arrow left is just used for simple adjustments. So whenever I'm flicking the ball, whenever I'm doing some sort of very tiny minuscule adjustment, then I just tap my joystick. But I don't recommend using the joystick as an arrow button. There are some freestylers that do use this, and I just don't recommend it because in the long term, when you play over long periods of times, then sometimes your finger can get a little sore. I get sore even just doing it with stalls. So if you start doing a bunch of arrow and you only use it for arrow, then it's gonna get a little sore. You can still do it, but I don't recommend it. So that's pretty much those binds. And then I also have my free arrow on my left bumper with drift, and this is the one that I use for wave dashes. And this is just super simple. It's very simple to understand, that's why I still have it there. It doesn't mean that it's the best way to go for this sorts of things, but it's just simple to understand, so why not just have it there, leave it there. And then I have a spare button, which is my X, and this one is the one that I use competitively to look down on the opponent. So whenever I'm looking up and I want to look down, then I use that. So it's my swivel down button. That's what I use. And then I just decrease my swivel speed a little bit. And so now it's just a little slower. That's it. Now the second bindings we're going to take a look at are the 2 arrow bindings. Now these bindings are very common in the freestyle scene because it gives you the ability to use both arrows very easily. It's just simple to understand. You have your arrow left on your left bumper, and you have your arrow right on your right bumper, and then you have everything else default. You have cams here, you have boost in here, you have jump in here, and you always leave the drive and the reverse button like alone. The thing about these bindings, and one thing you'll notice is a little odd, is the fact that you have drift on your left bumper. And what that means is that whenever you're doing dashes or anything like it, well, if you want to dash, or if you want to start just drifting without using arrow, then you're gonna have to do something in order to avoid moving with arrow left. And some people, when they have these bindings, you basically just cancel out the movement, cancel out both of your arrows by pressing both of them at the same time. So if I press arrow left and arrow right at the same time, then it cancels out. And so you can actually do that for wave dashes and stuff like that, and you'll still be drifting. That's what some freestylers do, and it's actually pretty useful, although it's a different way of thinking about the game, so the muscle memory is a bit odd, but it works. And these bindings are super useful, super good. You can learn every mechanic in the game with these bindings. So there's those. Of course, you can switch them out. You can take one of these into the other. It doesn't matter, however you feel comfortable with. Drift on your right bumper, whatever. I mean, it's the same thing really. And the third bindings we're going to take a look at are the boost in your right bumper bindings. And what this means is sometimes people are just comfortable having their boost in the right bumper, because if you played Need for Speed or other games like those, then you probably have the muscle memory of your boost in your right bumper. And so it's just very, very simple to understand that when you press your right bumper, you just boost, and it's just simple to understand. And then the thing about these bindings that's actually very good is that now you have your arrows on your buttons, and you can do two things. You can actually have your arrow left on your square, arrow right on your boost, and then jump in between. That's very important to have your jump in between. Or you can have, say, arrow left on your X, and then arrow right over here, and then have your jump in the middle. But the whole point of these bindings is that whenever you're trying to do a stall, for example, what you do is you feather through these three buttons. You're doing this. And so it's very simple to actually stall if you just press these three together. Of course, right now I don't have this binding, so it won't work. But whenever you do have this bindings, you just need to press through these three buttons. It's not straight feather, because you have to press arrow, then jump, and then your other binding. So it's like this. It's kind of like that. If you do that very fast, then it becomes a saw. You just need the right stick movements, and you just need those bindings. But then you can actually start doing this perfect saw, which is really useful. And that's really it. And also another good thing about these bindings is that you keep your normal arrow, so same as with my bindings, you can still do things like this. And it's really, really useful for that. So those are the three top bindings in the freestyle scene. Now you can do some things to actually get comfortable with as many options as you can. So maybe you can have boost over here in your right bumper, but you can also maybe try arrow left in one bumper on your left bumper, and then maybe have your arrow right on B, something like that. You can still do that. It's not bad. Now you would just be getting rid of your free arrow, or maybe putting it in square, for example, but you're still it's still the same concept. You're kind of mixing both bindings, but it's just as useful. So those three are the top three. Now let's actually get into a checklist to see if your current bindings are good for you in the long term, because sometimes what happens is you have really good bindings for whatever mechanical ability you have at the moment, but as soon as you try and learn some other mechanic, you get hard stuck. So right now we're going to try a couple of drills with little button presses, and you'll see if you are actually capable or not of doing some other mechanics in the future. Let's start. So let's start with jump. It's very important for you to have your jump button in a very good place where you can actually do precise taps. So that means whenever you're doing jumps, you're never actually gonna do long presses or really long presses, or you're gonna feather it. You're just gonna do quick taps. So it's important that it's in a place that's available for you at any time, but you really just need precise taps. So if you're gonna do 2 taps, make sure that you can do 2 taps like very quickly. Or maybe you want to do like a big tap and then 2 small taps. Just start drilling these kinds of things. Like check and see if you can do this. Now, jump is usually in coordination with your arrow. For example, whenever you're doing flips, whenever you're doing just fast aerials and then arrow length. So your jump is always or usually coordinated with your arrow. It's also coordinated with your cam switch. So it's important that you also have your cam switch somewhere in there where you can press both of them, not at the same time. It's usually never at the same time, but it's usually always in coordination. So whenever I'm doing a flip and I'm gonna finish a shot, for example, I'm usually in coordination with my jump. So say I'm doing this. So that kind of coordination, just very maybe long presses, but it's usually in coordination with your camera. And then drift. So whenever you're doing dribbles and whenever you're doing any sort of stuff, it's very important that the coordination of your drift and your jump is very good. And it's usually whenever you stop using drift that you start jumping. So that's usually what happens, but those are the buttons that you will have the most coordination with your jump. That's it. Now let's get into boost. Now boost, you may wonder why I didn't include it with the jump, and it's just that boost is mostly like completely separate from everything else. It can be pressed controllably as you press each other button randomly, and there's a slight coordination with your jump, but everything else is really completely independent from your boost. So for aerial jumps, for example, you usually press boost around the same time. So I'm usually pressing it right away. So see how I'm pressing it as soon as I start jumping? That's usually what's happening. So you can see that every single time it looks something like that. And another thing about boost that's very important for you to know is that boost, you never really feather it a lot. It's usually long presses. You're never really feathering it. Whenever you do feather it, it's in very, very specific scenarios, like dropping from an air dribble, when you have the ball on top and you're dropping with an air dribble. But really, you're never gonna do like feathering. If you ever see someone do feathers with their boost, it's usually a person that's not super mechanical. Yeah, you're never gonna see feathering. If you watch the best freestylers, you'll never see feathering in their boosts. So it's just long presses, controlled presses. Now let's go into arrow right and arrow left. Now this just has to make sense. So whenever you choose your arrow, just make sure that it makes sense, because then it'll be easier to learn it that way. And arrow, you have to basically make sure that you're capable of doing light presses, because sometimes what happens is you want to press very, very lightly on your arrow. So you should be capable of pressing very lightly your arrow. A good drill for this is just start aerialing and doing very light presses. You're going to be just fine with those. Now, let's get into camera switch. This may not seem like a very important binding, but as long as you can press it while you use your stick, boost, arrow, drive, or power slide, then you're gonna be just fine. So you have to be able to press it in any of those moments. And it's very important that you know how to do this, because in competitive and in freestyling, camera switching is very, very important for you to control, because that's what's gonna give you a better sense of where you're at relative to the ball. If you have no car, say you're just flying around, sometimes you want to focus on the car even though you're doing a shot with the ball. Sometimes you want to focus on the ball. So just make sure that that button is not restricted by any other button. It's just there always. That's it. But it's not an insanely difficult button to bind. And the last binding, which is the one that probably most of you are wondering, is drive and reverse. Now, I just recommend leaving these alone and completely separate, as using anything in the same bind could lead to problems in coordination and some specific mechanics. Like you'll see these players using arrow and their reverse in the same button. If you get really, really good at coordinating both of them at the same time whenever you're doing takeoffs and some things like those, you can get really good like that. I'm not saying no, but it's really difficult to get perfect input with something that's analog. So make sure that you understand this, and yeah, I mean, try and not put anything in there. And all this talk about putting your arrow on your trigger, I think it's bullshit. It won't help you mechanically. It's much better to time your arrow and make sure that the timing is right, other than just arrowing very little. And of course you can have it and it won't matter, but might as well just not have it in there. You know, like, why even have it in there if it will lead to coordination problems, unless you're insane. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for switching your binds, because I don't want to see people complain about that in 2000 hours. Alright, see you guys. Bye bye.